She's especially passionate about making the really, really good ideas travel further and faster. So she gets most excitement working with brands, connecting with communities to create societal value, brands that are inventing new products and business models to speed up the sustainable transition, and brands who recognize the power of culture in creating a better future. So I'm going to hand over to you, Helen, and look forward to hearing everything you've got to say for us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and hello everybody. Right, let me just open up the presentation for today. Hopefully everybody can see this okay. Please shout if you can't. So what we're going to look at today is, that's my details if you want to go and touch on LinkedIn. But what we're going to look at today is the why, the what, and the how of responsible consumption. And I thought it'd be good to kind of take a step back first and just talk a little bit about consumption and kind of where it came from. So we began to really actively encourage consumption of goods, primarily, and now services, after the Second World War. And it was a reaction to the economic challenges of the time of overproduction. So consumption was a solution to a very large problem, and it worked. It sorted the economy out. It's helped drive prosperity for billions of people globally. But the challenge we now face in 2024 is one of overconsumption. And so one route towards tackling that is to consume less by consuming more responsibly. And so when I say consuming more responsibly, I mean consumption that has a lower impact on the world around us. So it produces less waste, it's better for society, but still meets people's needs of the things that they need and want to buy. And the reason we need to do that is because we are just buying too much stuff. If we carry on with our lifestyles, if everybody carries on with lifestyles the way they are at the current levels of population growth, we'd need 3 planets worth of resource coming from the planet itself to sustain that. And that's obviously physically impossible. We don't have 2 spare planets. So we've got to figure out a way of managing the resources that we have better. And just a bit of a caveat, when I say we through this presentation today, I primarily mean people like us, well-off people in the north, because we're the ones with the unsustainable levels of consumption, and we're the ones with the culture that drives that as well. So whilst there are well-off people in the global south, they're a very small minority. The vast majority of people in the global south are consuming much less than well-off people in the global north. And just to bring to life a little bit the scale of our consumption, so on that point about global north versus global south, the material footprint per head of people in a high income country is about 10 times higher than that of a low income country. So you can see the scale difference between income there. Globally, we create something like 53 million tons of e-waste every year, which is especially bad because it's mined in obviously sometimes very poor countries, and you have kind of manual labor and children being used to get precious metals out of the ground. So it's got terrible social impact as well as environmental. We also, I think everyone's probably well aware of the plastic and the fact that it is everywhere. We throw millions, like 8 million tons of it away every year, and it just ends up in the sea. We found plastic waste in unborn fetuses as well as in our food, and in the stomachs of sea life and birds as well. And then fashion waste is another really famous example. So globally, we dump something like 92 million tons of textile waste each year. So this picture here is from a really famous textiles dump that I can't remember the name of now in Chile, but it's basically visible from space because it's so large. It's a little bit ridiculous. Now, saying all this, we know that people care about climate change. We know that people care about nature and they want nature to be better, but they don't only care about that. And a lot of what's going on in the world around us right now, the polycrisis or permacrisis that we call it, means there's lots of other concerns for people that are rising towards the top. So things like the economy, pricing, housing, inequality, education. I think what that means for anybody who wants to be more sustainable is we need to figure out what the and is. And that's going to be one of the big themes when we go into our conversation session later, is what's your and? So if you're creating a new product that is sustainable, is it also really good value for money? Is it convenient? Is it better than any of the products on the market? Do you have a better range? Like what's the and? Because sustainability alone in and of itself might gain some customers and get some people to come to you, but it's not the majority. The majority of people are somewhere in the middle of the population where they really care about the problems in the climate, but they need support to actually behave differently. And I think that's where we can start to use marketing levers, innovation levers to give people what they want. So getting people to shop differently, to consume differently, I think requires both innovation and cultural change. So innovation needs to be things like product innovation that changes what we buy. So things like plant-based meat, for instance, or EVs when you're thinking about cars. We need to think about changing how people buy. So that's thinking about innovation and business models. So things like renting rather than owning. And we also need to think about the operating model of businesses so that we can help people be more aware after they've bought something or consumed something of what happens next. So do you throw it away, or do you recycle it, or even better, upcycle it, or you share it to somebody else? Like, what do you do afterwards to stop that item becoming waste and actually keep it in use? The culture change levers for me are about changing why we buy. Like, we have a very consumer-based culture in the West in particular. There's loads of different ways of changing culture. What I've focused on are the levers that I think are pullable by marketing in particular, because that's the background I come from. So I think we can tell better stories about what a good future looks like. We can promote better symbols, and we can think of people as citizens, not just consumers, because if you think of somebody as a consumer, the only thing you can ever do is sell to them. Whereas if you think of them as a citizen, you can co-create with them, you can work with them, you can ask them for guidance and insight to inform product development. It gives you a much broader base from which to build a relationship. So what I thought I would do now is just very quickly go through some examples. There's loads of brands doing all of these things, but just go through one example for each of the 6 pillars to kind of go, this is what it looks like in real life. So in terms of changing what people consume, hypnos beds are a category you probably wouldn't think about as being, really, really into sustainability, but they've made all their products with natural fibers. They're fully recyclable, so they don't end up in landfill, which is actually quite a big issue because you can't give mattresses and bed materials to a charity shop. It's really hard to do anything with it when it's reached the end of its life in your home. The other thing they do really well is provide accreditation for how all of their products are made and the way in which they operate. The next example is a brand that is changing how people consume. So there are lots of brands in this space in the sharing economy. So there's like Airbnbs and Uber, which have their pros and their cons socially as well as environmentally. This I thought was a really interesting example because it's B2B. This is an organization called Cohelo, who are based in the US, and they are essentially like a Uber for hospital medical equipment. So if you're in they sell to hospital chains in the US, because obviously their health model is different to ours. And they can buy, let's say, an MRI machine, and then different hospitals can use it and book it as and when they need it, as opposed to every hospital having to find the funding for a machine that might not be used 100% of the time. So this idea of renting and sharing is becoming very mainstream and moving into lots of different industries that you might not think about it moving into. Selfridges are really, really interesting. They're obviously very high-end brand, but they have this really big goal of having 45% of their transactions come from something they called resell fridges. And resell fridges is essentially all about changing what happens to an item after the initial purchase and moment of consumption. So you can buy pre-loved clothing from Selfridges now. You can have your clothes repaired in Selfridges. You can do refill of various brands, and you can also rent designer clothes for really good prices. So they're giving you you can have a designer dress and make it more sustainable by renting it rather than buying it outright. That target, 45% of transactions to come from that, I think is really punchy. But they've done it in a way that feels very Selfridges. Like when we talk about repairing, they're not rehemming trousers. You're taking your designer leather handbag in, and they're partnering with a brand called the Handbag Clinic to make it beautiful again. So it still feels very Selfridges. They've not just turned into a secondhand clothing shop. They've done it in a way that really makes sense for their brand. The next one is, this is where we start to think about culture, changing the stories that we tell. So I don't know if everybody's seen this. I haven't got it here because it's about half an hour long, but it's worth looking at. It's a film called I can never pronounce this, the Shithropocene, which is basically trying to highlight the way in which our nervous systems have been hacked by business and capitalism in the name of capitalism and making money. So unlike traditional brand content, which quite often promotes its product as the solution to a problem, this film is actually really brutally honest about the nature of consumption and capitalism. And it tells the story of, essentially, it surfaces the social story of what's going on in society nowadays and how we've been impacted by overconsumption. And how it's not necessarily down to an individual making a bad choice, but down to the system and the systemic influences that affect all of us instead. So it's just a really interesting way of thinking about telling a story that you wouldn't necessarily normally get around. This is a very short video, which I'll play and see how it goes. It's from a brand called Faith in Nature, who make personal care goods like shower gel and stuff. And because they are obviously all about nature, they decided to give a place on the board to nature itself. And so they've created this really clear symbol of commitment to nature by making it one of the governing voices in their business and how the business runs and all of the decisions it makes. And nature is represented by a person that person has an equal say on the board to anybody else. So it's a really nice way and a really interesting way of bringing nature very, very front facing. And let's give this a little go. And
So there's an internal philosophy at Faith in Nature that nature is the boss. Recently, we started to wonder, well, what if nature really was the boss? It's kind of crazy, but at the same time, we kind of need to be asking crazy questions, I think. It felt right that a company called that should be asking this question. But I can't answer it. So I started digging around, and the more it became apparent that there are people out there who might be able to. So I called them up.
So the plan is to interview you and then stick you to a tree.
I'm going to be on an iPad stuck on a tree. I mean, I think the idea of making nature a director would probably feel crazy to many lawyers, but I'm a lawyer who is always open to ideas. I believe that the rights of nature will be to the 21st century what human rights were to the 20th. And that makes it a really exciting area to work in. We do need to have nature's voice and nature's interests represented in our legal, political, and economic systems. And I realized the ridiculousness of that imbalance when I was sitting under a yew tree that was thousands of years old. And yet I could go on my phone and in about less than an hour create a company that would have more legal rights and standing than that tree.
Currently, our entire legal system, our economic system, our social systems are very anthropocentric, meaning humans are the center of the universe. And the result of this is that we've left nature out of the conversation. Our laws work to protect humans above nature, as if we are separate from nature, which is not true. And the result of this has been that humans have destroyed nature, exploited it to the maximum extent possible because our laws tell us to do that. I was very surprised to get this email from Faith in Nature. Rarely do we get a company that wants to integrate rights of nature into their corporate structures.
So the lawyers did their thing and we did ours. And today we're making nature the director of our company. Nature has an equal vote, same as any other director, same as the rest of us.
Effectively appointing a director that's representing the voice of nature within the company.
That person is independent of the company, and we've tried really hard to ensure that there's a separation of powers, because it's really important that that director feels able to act in the best interest of nature. It's a huge step to saying everything Faith in Nature does is set out to essentially do no harm, protect nature, to recognise nature, to give nature rights, to give nature power, and to give nature a vote. And that's why this is really important.
From this point onwards, we've very literally put the natural world at our boardroom table. We can't be willfully blind anymore to the impact that we're having on the natural world and on the planet in what we do. Faith in Nature is the first company in the world to appoint nature to its board of directors, but we don't want to be the last. And it becomes meaningful when it's not just us doing it. The model exists. We're now making that available to whoever wants it, in the hope that other companies adopt it too. It would be massive if there was a voice for the natural world in every boardroom of every business on the planet. If business wants to be the good guy, it can be.
Hopefully that did actually work for everybody, and you enjoyed that. Oh. So what hopefully I've highlighted there with some of those examples is the power of an and. So the bed company make comfortable beds, but it's and sustainable. Cohilo renting an MRI machine is a more sustainable option, and it's a more cost-effective option. Faith in Nature are really, like, if you ever use their products, they're really lovely products, and they're putting nature front and foremost in their thinking. So I thought it'd be a really nice kind of provocation to think about what's your and. How do you do sustainability and what's your thing?